we are really wrapping up this semester quickly. Other than your case study assignment, which is your very final project for this class and serves as your final, the lesson plan with reflection is your other assignment that needs to be done. It's due in 2 weeks on April 28th, and it can be for a class, a small group, or a one-on-one individual type lesson. But the crux of it is the case study participant has to be a part of that group, class, or be the individual in the one-on-one setting, because you're going to write an appropriate reading lesson based on the needs of your case study participant. And we all just wrote a reading goal for our case study students, so you're going to use that goal and craft a lesson that's either helping them meet one of the objectives or that's going to help them meet their goal. Consider also the reading accommodations and or modifications that you specified. And I want you to take that and create a whole lesson plan for your student. I know it's late in the semester because it took us so long to get our IEPs written. They're very difficult to learn, but once you learn them, they become old hat. So if you're in the position that you've already taught all your lessons for this semester, then you will instead create a lesson that will not be taught, but you will reflect on why you chose the materials still. Okay, so you're going to do a lesson plan, and then after you've done that lesson plan, you're going to reflect. Now, if you still have 1 or 2 lessons left in your CT and you can plan it so that you can actually teach this lesson, by all means, strive to do that, because that will get you the most valuable information and experience. But if you have already taught all your lessons or have already planned your 4th and 5th lesson with your CT and you just cannot possibly do this too, I want you to create a lesson plan that you don't teach it, but still reflect. So if you've actually taught it or not taught it, you're still going to reflect on why the materials and organization pattern of the lesson would work for the student, or why you thought it would work for the student. You're going to reflect on the success of the lesson. So if you are teaching this, you're going to tell me what was successful. Did the student meet the criteria that you had outlined? Remembering that you've got to make sure your lesson plan objectives are measurable. And really, you can probably take the goal language or the objective language from your reading goal in the IEP and make that your goal for the lesson. And that would be very appropriate, and you know it's already measurable. The other thing is, you also need to include a method of charting the student's progress toward that goal, okay, the goal that your lesson is aiming to support. So is it going to be a checklist? Is it going to be a running record? What are you going to do? What is the student going to produce as evidence that they are or are not meeting the goal of the lesson? Now, for those of you who actually teach it, you will address the success of the lesson. Those of you who aren't teaching it, I want you to think about what could go right based on what you know of the student, and what could have gone wrong had you taught this lesson. What are areas that you kind of foresaw that could have been maybe tricky and maybe gotten in the way of the student performing as you had originally envisioned? So if you really teach it, talk to the strengths and areas of growth of the lesson, and talk about how successful it was based on your charting of this student's progress. What did the evidence of this lesson teach you about the student, and how well they did or did not meet the measurable objective of your lesson? If you didn't get a chance to teach the lesson, then simply tell me what you foresaw going very well and what you foresaw possibly being an area of issue. The last part of the reflection is, what would you do next based on your assessment of the student's performance? This is going to be a really easy one for those of you who actually got to teach the lesson. If you didn't, I want you to take back here where you supposed an area that the student would struggle in based on what you know of the student. So let's say the lesson was on decoding and you taught them to skip a word and go back to it once you've got the fuller context of the sentence. Maybe you know that student takes several repetitions of a concept before they get it solid. And so you would say, in my next lesson, I would revisit this skill and you're going to tell me a new way you're going to teach it and approach it so that the student is getting a multimodal experience. Or, that's one example of how you could do that. But your reflection needs to be substantive. It needs to be thoughtful and integrative of what you have learned in the field this semester, as well as what you've learned in your course studies. So I want you to think about what could you do next based on these students' performance. And again, if you didn't get to teach this lesson, I want you to tell me, based on what you anticipated being an area of struggle, what could you do next? Based on what you saw as a strength, what could you do next? And I want you to do the same, only use assessment to justify your responses if you actually do teach this lesson. As always, do not use the participant's real name or identifying information. So stick with the pseudonym you've been using throughout for this case study. Now there is a rubric for this assignment. First off, assessment. The assessment of in your lesson plan, and you are using the long form lesson plan, was it meaningful to the needs of the student? So if you're telling me that this student is going to be working on decoding, your assessment shouldn't be on comprehension. It should measure what the objective, the lesson's objective is. So yes, your lesson may have fluency and comprehension components, but is the assessment really measuring your objective for that day? So make sure that it's easy to use, meaningful, and is really helping you chart that student's progress towards the lesson's measurable objective, which comes from your reading goal. The lesson plan itself, did you have a strong objective based on academic standards, which you should have because we already made standards-based reading goals for our IEP? And did you tailor the instruction to meet the individual needs of that particular student? Did you apply the accommodations and/or modifications that you had outlined? Is the standard stated? Are the procedures very clearly written so that if I was going to teach this lesson for you, I could jump right in and do that and understand what you needed me to do? Also, just because you need to do direct instruction with a student doesn't, because I'm assuming a lot of you will be doing direct instruction in a reading setting, but it doesn't mean you forget that you need to have a dynamic hook and a strong closure that summarizes the experience for you and the student, especially the student. So really take the time to craft that. How are you going to get the student engaged so they don't feel like they're just there for direct instruction and getting their teeth pulled, you know? Instead, how are you making it meaningful and exciting and engaging so they get to feel rewarded and not punished for getting to go, you know, to the intervention room or to participate in this lesson plan? Make sure you allot time for the lesson. Do you have a comprehensive list of needed materials? So if you tell me that you're going to use a computer game or an app or a worksheet or a PowerPoint, I need to have a link to that game or I need to have that worksheet attached to the lesson plan. I need to see exactly the materials that you're using in this lesson. And the modifications and accommodations or extensions are well thought out and provide for differentiated learning. So there may not be modifications. You could insert the word accommodations in that place. And are you thinking about the ways to differentiate? So if this is a one-on-one setting, this is super easy because it's just the student's needs you're tailoring your lesson to. But if it's a small group setting or a whole class setting, how are you differentiating not just for this learner, but the other learners in this group? Use of assessment and analysis. The lesson plan really needs to be very effective in using analysis to guide instruction, and it needs to be highly supportive of student learning. So I'm going to go back when I grade these, and I'm going to look at the IEP and see how well you were aligning your instruction to the assessment and analysis conducted in the IEP based on the student's needs. Now, if you have some clear and concise ways, then you'll get 8 points. If you needed to be more supportive, 6 points. And if you didn't address what was learned from your IEP, then that's going to be a big problem. So make sure you're really looking at that IEP as you craft this lesson. And again, creative lesson. Just because a student's in an intervention room doesn't mean they need skill and drill, boring instruction, or instruction that's so routinized that it never changes anytime that they come in. Instead, what's the interesting hook that's going to lead into your lesson? How are you going to vary activities throughout that time so the students are staying engaged? And are you being creative in your specialized instruction? Are you making it meaningful and engaging for your student? And then the end, the reflection's worth 15 points of this assignment. So you really want to spend a lot of time working on this lesson plan and making it very strong, very supportive of your students' needs. Because that's worth 35 of the 50 points of this assignment. Now, don't get through crafting the lesson plan and then poop out on the reflection, because the reflection is equally as important. It's worth up to 15 points of your 50, and that's a huge chunk. So I want you to then reflect on why you chose the materials and organize the lesson as you did, as well as the success of the lesson and what you would do next. Don't forget that section. I've stressed it over and again this semester. When you did any assessment, the literacy interview, the reading assignment, any of those, the anecdotal records, any of those assignments had that component. What implications does it have for your future practice? Assessment is meaningless, and reflection in a lot of cases will be meaningless if you don't plan to do something with that information. So make sure you don't skip that component. So if you're, again, I'm going to reiterate this, if you are really teaching this lesson based on the student's strengths and needs, how will you support the growth of the student in future based on what you saw in this lesson and based on what assessment told you? Don't just focus on what they did bad, but focus on what they did well and how you're going to help both of those areas grow and converge and meet and be a whole strength for the child in future. If you don't, if you don't actually teach this lesson, still, based on what you know of the student, what did you anticipate going well? What could you see going awry? And how will you support both the strengths and needs of the student again in future? You can still do that in your reflection. If you have any questions about this assignment, let me know. I do urge you to go to Moodle. All the directions from the syllabus are here at the top of the assignment. And then you have a full rubric. Look at the gradient. Take the time to really focus on the difference between the full point section and the you were almost there section to make sure you're doing this to the very best of your ability. And as always, if you have questions, let me know. This is due in 2 weeks, so you need to be working on this now. With this being so close to the end of the semester, I'm really not going to be looking to give extensions beyond maybe a day or two. So you really need to be planning now to get this assignment done in a timely fashion. And with 2 weeks to do this, I have every confidence that you will.